Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast. I'm here with Mr. Ron Petrucia, and we've been talking about the first Eucharistic prayer and talking about some of the saints in the Eucharistic prayer, because rather than just rattling off all the names of the saints, it's always good to have some background, so that we can better appreciate their contributions to the church. And so we talked a little bit about at the last podcast, we talked about St. Peter and St. Paul, and but we focus a lot on St. Paul. But what about St. Peter? What do you find that St. Peter and his significance? Well, I mean, being the first pope, and
extremely significant.
The leader.
Peter is the name is also significant because Peter is the rock.
Yeah.
And what is the rock? In the Psalms, the rock of my salvation always refers to God. So Jesus renaming him rock, we had said in the last podcast that renamings were important. So Jesus renaming him rock is really significant because it basically indicates his authority as the leader of the church, the authority that Christ has passed on to him. So that he becomes the rock on which the church is built.
You are Peter.
And that rock in turn points to God.
Right. Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it. Yeah. And so here the Lord gives him the authority over his church. And even at the last conversation in the Gospel of John, where Jesus takes Peter aside and says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And 3 times, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And there, one of the details is at the charcoal fire, because there'll be the reversal of the denial 3 times by a charcoal fire.
Right.
Yeah, and so he was selected and chosen. And it's very interesting where, Jesus, of all the disciples, he would take Peter aside and would say that specifically to Peter. But I found it also interesting is that in the other Gospels besides Mark, because it's believed that in the Gospel of Mark it was Peter's speech to the speech about Jesus, and Mark wrote it down, and it was kind of his homily, and yet there was no redemption for Peter in the Gospel of Mark, but in the other Gospels there was redemption and a reversal of the denial. So Peter is a very significant, plays a very significant role in the church, being that he is kind of the leader of the apostles, and that he is the rock, as you said. And it's also interesting too the way he died, because when he died, that he was crucified upside down.
Upside down.
Yeah, because he felt like he was not worthy to be crucified like Christ.
Right.
So he chose to be crucified upside down. Yeah, and he also gave his life for Jesus. So, and I'm sure there are more things that we can talk about St. Peter. And sometimes, as they say, St. Peter, he sometimes put his foot in his mouth, and some of the things that he says. So, but
more than sometimes.
But yeah.
He had a habit.
Yeah, of doing that. So, yeah. So there's Peter and Paul, the 2 great saints, and I know, like in Rome, there's always like in the statues of St. Peter and Paul, they always hold something. So St. Peter always holds the depiction, the keys. The key
right.
to the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And then Paul always holds the
sword
and the gospel, because
his preaching was like a 2-edged sword.
2-edged sword. Wow.
Yeah.
Preaching like a 2-edged sword. Yeah. Okay. So you got Peter and Paul. Okay, and then who else here?
James and John, the sons of Zebedee.
That's right. sons of Zebedee.
Or the sons of thunder.
That's right, yeah, because when they were going through a town, a Samaritan town or something like that, and then they were not welcome, and so, they were asking Jesus if we can pray and ask for
fire and brimstone to rain down.
To rain down on that city, sons of thunder. Or also that one story about how grant that we may sit when you come into your kingdom, one on your right and one on your left.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in one of the Gospels it talks about how the mother requested rather than they requested themselves.
Right.
Yeah. So the one on your right and one on your left, it's actually pointing towards the cross, the crucifixion, and one being crucified on the right and one being crucified on the left. Right. Yeah. So we got James and John, the sons of thunder. Okay, and then who else here?
James was martyred early,
James and Mark. Mm-hmm.
somewhat after St. Stephen. He was murdered by Herod.
Oh, yeah.
And John lived to be about 100.
That's right, he was not a martyr.
He was not a martyr.
St. John.
He was dropped into boiling oil,
Oh, was he?
according to church tradition, and survived.
Wow.
So he was sort of considered almost a martyr.
Yeah, almost a martyr. Yeah,
But he lived a long, full life
right,
and probably wrote his gospel near the end of it.
right. Yeah, and like they said 90 AD or something like that was written.
But
And
some
he
people
was-
think he wrote it before the destruction of the temple,
Mhm.
and that he wrote Revelation after. Others think it's the other way around.
Right.
My own feeling is that he wrote Revelation before, and
Really?
the Gospel of John after in the 90s, probably toward the end of the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
He was also, as he got old, he was carried around in a bed, and wherever he went, people would ask him to say something enlightening,
Oh, yeah.
and he would always say, "We should love one another."
That's right, because his favorite word is love.
Mhm,
And
right.
he would talk about for God so loved the world
Mhm.
and beloved, and that's his go-to word,
So-
his favorite word.
Very powerful message.
Yeah, we should
I
love
mean,
one another.
They're,
I think we should always hear that, right? We should love one another.
yeah.
Yeah. And he was exiled, right, on the island of Patmos, and
Mhm.
it's believed that there he saw all these visions, these revelations. But even that word revelation, because I think before they would call that last book of the Bible Apocalypse.
Apocalypsis in Greek.
which means unveiling.
Unveiling.
Yeah,
Right.
unveiling rather than revelation. But I mean, same idea, but still a little bit kind of tying back to the unveiling in the temple, where the veil in the temple was torn in half, and when Jesus died on the cross, and then there the connection to the veil in the temple. Okay, so you got John, and John is Yohanan in Hebrew, means God is merciful. And James was one of the bishops, right, in Jerusalem. He remained a bishop in Jerusalem, correct?
Not that James. It
Okay,
was
there was another
Jesus' cousin.
Right, okay. James and John, and then the next one is
Thomas.
Thomas, Doubting Thomas,
Right.
which also means twin. Thomas means twin, Doubting Thomas. And, we hear the story about Thomas and the first time that he was not present when the disciples were gathered post-resurrection of Jesus, and then after that he was present the second time when they witnessed to him. Oh, the time goes so fast. I think we're getting close to 10 minutes. So let's pause for
He
now.
also, one last comment about Thomas, that he also was introduced Christianity to India.
India, that's right.
So he stayed the course and became a very successful missionary.
Okay, very good.